The president has been saying that an increase in mail-in voting would hurt Republicans. Is there any truth to that?
Well, historically, there's not been any truth to that. Historically, what we've seen is that those who vote by mail tend to be disproportionately older than other voters and disproportionately more likely to be white. That might skew a little bit towards Republicans, although it's generally fairly even. I think we're seeing, though, the president's recent rhetoric having some effect only on his own voters who are now withdrawing from one of their options to vote during a pandemic. And so we are seeing reductions in the number of Republicans who are requesting mail ballots. I don't know if you might have seen it, but the president just tweeted about 25 minutes ago, again, now encouraging people only in the state of Florida to request a mail ballot, saying that mail voting in Florida is safe and secure. Of course, it's very well known to those who follow elections, the system in place in Florida is pretty much exactly the same as we would see in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, and Maine.
How worried should we be about voter fraud in 2020?
We should be as worried about voter fraud in 2020 as we are in any other election, which is to say we shouldn't be very worried about it at all. It happens extremely rarely. It doesn't really matter whether people are voting in person or by mail. There are so many checks and balances and protections in place to prevent voter fraud from occurring. And in those very, very rare instances where it does, it is detected, those people are investigated and prosecuted, and they suffer serious penalties. But the amount of voter fraud we would see in a presidential election, even with 150 million ballots being cast, would be measured probably in the dozens, maybe hundreds at the most, out of 150 million ballots cast.
Okay. And right now we're also seeing the president kind of rail against mail-in voting, but he himself says that he's going to vote absentee. What's the difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting?
Well, it's really simple. In the states, in the vast majority of states, including Maine, there is zero difference between mail voting and absentee voting. The process is the same. A voter requests an absentee or mail ballot for a particular election. That information is checked against the voter list to make sure the right person has requested it. That ballot then is at some point sent to the voter. The voter then fills it out and either returns it by mail or drops it off in an election office. And then all of the information on the envelope, which is very specific to that voter, very personal information, including their signature, is checked against the voter's record on the file to make sure that it was properly voted by that person. So there are checks and balances in place. Doesn't matter whether you're in Maine or Florida, you can feel safe and secure knowing that vote's going to be processed properly and that fraud is not going to be possible.
There has been discussion, from the president about delaying the general election by 100 days. With your expertise, do you think that that would be necessary?
It's not only not necessary, we've been holding primaries during this period of time, but more importantly, it's not possible and it's not going to happen. If you look at what election officials around the country, including very conservative Republicans, as well as their liberal Democratic colleagues, they will tell you they are not postponing the election. The election date is set in law by Congress. It is almost impossible to consider the idea that Congress would change that. And most importantly, the president's term ends on January 20th, 2021 at noon, unless he is reelected by the Electoral College. So the election is going to go forward. Voting will end on November 3rd. It will not begin on November 3rd. Of course, there'll be a lot of mail voting and early voting before then, but it will end on November 3rd. And at some point in the days, or perhaps even a week later, we will know who won.
If I am on Twitter in the days and weeks leading up to the election and I see friends posting about voting online, is that going to happen anywhere in the country where people are going to be able to cast a ballot online?
Virtually nobody will be able to cast a ballot online. If you see something saying that you can vote online or by phone, that is disinformation, probably being amplified by our foreign adversaries. There are a very small number of voters overseas, members of the military, who may have access to receiving a ballot delivered to them online, but it's a very, very small number of voters. We're literally talking about dozens of people who might have access to a system like that, hundreds of people. If you're here in the United States, you're going to have many options, but one of them will not be voting online. You can vote by mail, you can vote early in person, you can vote on election day in person, but you won't be able to vote online. And frankly, you shouldn't be able to vote online. It's not adequately secure yet.
Could you elaborate on that? You know, why can't we in this modern age vote online?
So I get asked a lot, I can do my banking online, I can do all of my other transactions online, why can't I vote online? And the answer is really simple. When I do banking or any other transaction, it's really important that they be able to trace that transaction back to me. So there is definitely knowledge that I have confirmed my identity and it's David Becker who's doing that banking transaction. But we vote in secret in the United States. We don't want to know how any individual voted. And being able to have an auditable ballot to confirm that that ballot was counted properly without connecting it to a particular individual is a challenge we haven't quite succeeded at solving yet. So we're not ready to do online voting. But the good news is there are so many options to vote, more than ever before. People can vote before election day, on election day, by mail. They can deliver their mail ballot in the mail or in person. There's so many different ways to vote than ever before, and I'm confident that voters all over the country are going to find a safe and convenient way to cast their ballot.
That's all for me. Anything else that you think would be important for Maine voters to know?
Unlike in past elections where you might be able to decide when and how to vote and what you're going to do in the election, maybe a day or two before the election, we're going to need to plan for this election, just like we're now planning to do things like going to the grocery store, which we didn't have to do before. So make a plan well in advance. Decide if you want to vote by mail, if that's right for you. If not, that's okay. Probably over half of the country will not be voting by mail in November, and that's all right. Find out where your polling place is. Make sure you're registered to vote and your voter registration record is up to date in case you moved and it's all accurate. And then very importantly, we're going to need a lot of people to volunteer as poll workers this year. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges, to have staff working in the polls who are younger, who are healthy, or not at risk of as much risk as our older population who tend to be the volunteers who work in the polls. So if you can, find your local election office, find your Secretary of State's office, and volunteer to work in the polls. You'll find it's really rewarding and you'll be doing a great service.
David, thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure, Anna. All right, take care.